Well, for more analysis on how Pfizer could still do well with sales of its COVID vaccine, we're joined by Dr. Anthony Harris via Skype from Chicago. He's the Chief Innovation Officer and Associate Medical Director for WorkCare. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So first, talk about the vaccine's launch, the impact that it's really had on Pfizer's earnings and its bottom line.
Sure. So if we look at the launch of Pfizer and the surrounding, kind of relief in terms of it being the first to hit the market here in the U.S., the response has been great in regards to those who have had it. I've had it myself in terms of both doses, and the experience from the patient standpoint, which is really important in terms of the sentiment for vaccinations in the U.S., has been well. And, we had the blushes of, a couple of instances of anaphylaxis, and that is to be expected. And if we look at then overall the response from a unintended consequences standpoint, there's virtually, no pushback. And so we know that the messaging of safety has been prominent, and we see that that's going to do and continue to do very well for Pfizer as we move forward.
And there is something to be said about being the first one to get approved. So how much has Pfizer's focus on COVID, though, affected its other ventures, especially as more companies get their vaccines approved as well?
Sure. If you look at the main detractor to Pfizer and the response from a logistics standpoint, it really is the cold chain, right? Meaning specifically how the vaccine needs to be kept at -70 degrees. And if we look at then Moderna, which just needs refrigeration, and then finally, looking at AstraZeneca, as well as Johnson & Johnson, there are going to be some contenders that once they're approved here in the U.S., will be competitive, very competitive against Pfizer's vaccine. So, we'll see how things play out in regards to these approvals as they come through, but expect to have some significant competition, especially from a supply standpoint. Because if you look at what's happening with distributed doses of the Pfizer and Moderna versus the administered doses, it used to be about a third of the doses distributed were administered in the U.S. over the last 2 to 3 weeks. That gap has narrowed, and because of that narrowing gap, we can see that it's a supply issue that we're dealing with across the nation, and that gives openings to competitors that are going to be approved here most likely very shortly.
So then talk about Pfizer's ongoing strategy with COVID after this initial rollout stage, from making sure it's effective against these new variants, as well as keeping sort of the production and distribution on track.
The Sanofi, agreement is really good, right? It spells good news for the millions of bottling processes that are going to happen, and that will help with the supply issue. From the specificity of protecting individuals from COVID-19 in regards to the Pfizer vaccine, there aren't a tremendous swell of concerns from the clinical community, right? We've seen these stories come out of some small concerns of it not being effective, but if you look at the data, if you look at the specific location of how the virus gets in our system through the H2 receptors and the binding site, the whole nine with the antibodies, it should still be enough to keep us safe in regards to what the vaccine itself engenders in terms of our immune protection. So I think that's going to play out very well for both Pfizer and the others that have similar profiles with regard to protecting us from this version and the variants of SARS-CoV-2 at this time.
Now, obviously, access and availability, and obviously price as well, are big factors there. So what's the latest in terms of the company's manufacturing partnerships and how it plans on sharing some of its vaccine formulas with some of these smaller firms in developing nations?
Sure. That logistical hurdle that they're endeavoring right now is going to be key, right? Again, speaking to the Sanofi agreement and manufacturing and increasing the supply, it unfortunately is the history of Pfizer that is probably going to be the biggest detractor, right? If we look at what happened in the U.S., where early on there was an opportunity for the U.S. to have more supply, but the previous administration in the White House didn't take Pfizer up on that, right? And so Pfizer has doubled down on the strategy of ramping up manufacturing across the globe, and we'll see how it plays out from the smaller geographics that are going to be very much lagging behind as they continue to lag behind in terms of administration of vaccines due to access, right, and due to supply. But hopefully, to reach that global, herd immunity, we'll have not just Pfizer but others stepping up with that localized manufacturing process to ease some of the logistical hurdles.